Mela Madness is the new series that more or less heralds the struggles of men and the processes of more or less being impacted by mental illness and many times trauma. In this episode of the Manhood Chronicles, we will be exploring the concept behind Mela Madness. And the Mela Madness will be the confessions of a therapist, my friend Sean Whitehorn, as he talks about trauma, sexuality, and abuse, and how many times men that go through sexual abuse is often seen or minimized to the contrary of those of an opposite gender. I want you guys to enjoy this show as Sean Whitehorn and I talk about borderline and how being touched as a child has impacted him in a negative way. Are you a victim of Mela Madness? Are you a victim of thinking about the things that hurt you in the past? Or do you ponder why people do the things they do, as meta comes from the word metacognition, which means to consciously think about what you're thinking about. Sit back, relax, and enjoy this show as I bring it to you live from the greatest state in the Union, the Tar Heel State. And I need you guys to remember this as we explore the dynamics of borderline personality disorders. If it ain't 7, it ain't kosher. If it ain't kosher, it ain't right. Don't let mental illness and borderline personality make you a slave to your past, your present, and also your future. Be well.
Pathologies that are persisting in our culture, but also the triumphant victory of Johnny Depp. How would you like to add to the conversation, brother?
Well, first, I was greetings, brother. I definitely like to say greetings and salutations to you.
No doubt. Blessings.
You know, I think where I would add to it is such as we know, mental health, diagnoses of mental health, of course, it can be a daunting task at times.
Yes.
We were talking about, borderline personality disorder. Mm-hmm. And oftentimes I'll ask people when I'm trying to explain the disorder, I will say, which would you rather have, borderline diabetes or they would say, or diabetes? They would say, well, borderline, because I'm not all the way diabetic. I said, which one would you rather have, borderline high blood pressure or high blood pressure? And they would always say borderline. And I oftentimes tell them when it relates to the personality disorders, borderline is the one that you would likely not want to have because you're sitting on the cusp of all the others. Mm-hmm. It's a combination of. And so I think with Amber Heard, her diagnosis obviously played out in her relationship. Me, as someone who suffers from borderline personality disorder, mm-hmm. and also, as I mentioned, as a licensed therapist, mm-hmm. I would see it play out in my relationships. Relationships with borderlines. But one thing that I've learned over the years, you hit on a very good point. I'm 56 mm-hmm. years old now.
Yes, sir.
And I can honestly say my symptoms began to reduce as I began to age. I'm currently in therapy. I've been seeing the same therapist now for several years.
Yes, sir.
And that's one of the things that we talk about is that over time, as I get older, some of my symptoms are, reducing on their own. Mm-hmm. But I can honestly say that being borderline, one of the things that I tell any woman that before we begin to enter into a relationship is I'm very upfront about the disorder. Mm-hmm. And then I ask them, do us a favor, do a little research, and then come to me because, every borderline doesn't have all the same symptoms. The symptoms
right.
are not always going to be the same.
Yes, sir.
So I always tell them, look it up, come to me, talk to me about what my symptomology is. And I think that's, although yet and still I'm not successful in my relationships, although I think that's one of the things that'll help if you're dating someone who's borderline, if they've been diagnosed, is to do your research on it and ask questions. I think that's the one thing I would want to add, because it's not impossible to love a borderline, but it is definitely a daunting task.
Let's go and you share as much as you want to share, Sean, but let's talk about the trauma that you went through that caused you to become borderline, and you share what you feel comfortable sharing. But I never knew, Sean, you had borderline. I would have never thought you were diagnosed with that, because normally it's a byproduct of trauma, abandonment.
As mine is.
Okay, share with the audience what you feel comfortable sharing. How did yours come into full manifestation, and how did it impact relationships with the women that you were dealing with?
I would have to say that there's two components that led to it. One was early sexual trauma. childhood sexual trauma.
Boom, boom.
And
that's it.
Oh, without doubt.
That's it.
And what's so specifically how it really impacted before I knew it, it was at the hands of two very dark-skinned females. They were both sisters. Wow. And this occurred for about 2.5, 3 years of my early development. Wow. And it was so odd that two things that would happen. One of the things that would occur with their inappropriate behavior was kissing. You know, there was never any penetration because I was very young. I couldn't penetrate them. So that never happened. But there was some, some fraudage going on and things like that. However, one of the things that I always detested is that I had to kiss them. And I learned later on in my relationships, two things that came out. I did not like kissing women, and I would not date dark-skinned women. And I could, for the life of me, I was not able to put that together with the trauma from the past. Would not date dark-skinned women because both of these young ladies were dark. And I did not like kissing women because that was one of the things that I detested, that these two, and they were, they were probably about 7 years older than I was at the time. They were definitely mid-teenagers. They were 16, would be 16 and 19, I want to say, at that age. But then I think the triggering, of course, I came into the military at 17. The military is and I stayed in the military for 24 years. So, from 83 to 2007, there's a lot, unfortunately, that I had to experience in the military that I think that really triggered it. But where it played out in my relationships, I've been married 3 times. Wow. I had 3 failed marriages, without a doubt, 3 failed marriages. Wow. And this is all before understanding that I was suffering from borderline personality disorder. A lot of times I would attribute it to my post-traumatic stress disorder. And even as a therapist, just like as a lawyer, a great lawyer would never represent himself, nor would a good therapist ever attempt to diagnose him or herself. Right. So I would see it play. I've had 3 failed marriages, a lot of sexual promiscuity at my young age, just multiple women. Just one of the reasons why I think I dealt with so many women is it made me feel better about myself. And what I found out in therapy was that the dealing with so many women was because it gave me the one thing that those 2 young ladies took from me was control. Control, boom, right. Yep, it gave me control. Yes, sir, right. Because I could manipulate these women. I could have one come in the bed when the other one's... And so I had that control, but it just played out over the years and failed relationship after failed relationship. And I think my last relationship is when I really started to realize, because I had a lot of aggressive behavior, because you think about the posturing and being that, making my physique bigger than it is, to control the situation. I became a drill sergeant. As I mentioned, and I'll be brief, I spent 24 years in the military, very successful. Retired as a first sergeant. I was a drill sergeant. I was a recruiter, the whole 9. I was a first sergeant. And one of the reasons I realized I was so successful in the military was that, for lack of a better word, in many ways, the military rewards and encourages some forms of aggressive behavior, some forms of dysfunctionality. You have to be successful. And for some of us, I wouldn't say that as a whole. And this was the Army that I spent. So, but yeah, I saw it play out in my relationships. I saw it play out. I was able to, if I were working in corporate America, I would not have survived. In the military, it made sense. It was like, hey, this is a real soldier. He's aggressive. He's forward thinking, But if I were in corporate America, some of those behaviors I exhibited in the military I would have never lasted in corporate America. So I think that's kind of sums it up for me. And also, I would add medication. I've been on medication. As a therapist, one of the things that I would tell my patients all the time is I would say, hey, look, I'm not just a therapist. I'm also a patient. And I would tell all of my patients that. And I think one of the things that's really helped me over the years is really gaining a strong understanding of pharmacology. Medication compliance is so important. Understanding medication. So and some of the holistic things as well, because everything, we don't necessarily need medication for everything, but learning some of the holistic treatments, learning to understand your diagnosis, identify those behaviors, that kind of sums it up for me.
That's Coach, excellent. That's excellent. And it goes back to what I said about comorbidity. You had the coalescing of not only post-traumatic stress disorder, but also with the borderline personality disorder as well. It's a diagnosis that can be very daunting, to say the least. But as you go and continue to ruminate with your struggles, and Sean, I'm gonna do a show on this, man. I'm gonna ask to critique it because a lot of times we don't talk about the struggles of men. We think that sexual abuse is one directional, but it's not. Men go do sexual abuse probably at the same rate of women do, and molestation, but we don't talk about it or we minimize it. And
if I could add, Coach, we also oftentimes we negate the fact, because I was never molested by men. It was by two females, and we always negate the fact that it's just as traumatic. When women or young girls do this to young boys, it is just as traumatic as if a man is doing it to a young girl. Yes, and sir, we negate that. We think about it as such as, I heard the jokes of, as I got older, oh man, I wish somebody would have did that to me when I was 12. I wish we had those jokes, but we don't realize it is just as destructive.
Right. It is just as destructive. And sadly, a lot of men have been part of it. Actually, I'm going to do a show, Sean, and I'm going to use your story as a template for that story. I got a show that's been brewing, and we're going to talk about sexual abuse and sexual molestation and how it impact a lot of our men, because, many people go do dissociative issues when they become touched. And then also many times they develop maladaptive behaviors as well. You think about R. Kelly. He was Robert Kelly, but the trauma that he went through is like he became a deviant and he became R. Kelly. And we tend to minimize what he went through. We look at R. Kelly after the fact, but we don't look at R. Kelly before the fact. And some will say, oh, he's a demon, he needs, but you don't but see, people that say that, they don't understand how molestation impacts people. Some people become hypersexual. Some become hyposexual. I mean, they become very rigid. You became hypersexual.
Very happy.
Right, you had a lot of failed marriages. How did the sex make you feel, Whitehorn? Did the sex make you feel full? Hold tight. Shout out to my man Top Gun for that $5 super sticker. And he said this is why the coaching commission of this platform is so important. And that's on the manosphere. No doubt, you funny, man. But did it make you? Did sex make you feel full? Because I'm sure there was a level of emptiness. Did you ever endure emptiness, and did sex make you feel full?
I would think that early on it definitely filled me. It felt great. The ability to conquer, the ability to manipulate, all those things initially in my younger days. I mean, it was a drug like no other. I'll say that, to say the least. But as I got older, that's when it became more challenging emotionally, where I started to move away from a lot of the sexual promiscuity, the multiple partners, the just all of that I engaged in with women. Because it no longer, as we talk about it in therapy, my therapist and I, it no longer filled that void. In fact, it made it worse. I can think of times when I'd have sex with a woman and literally in the beginning because my thing was all about initial penetration. When I initially penetrated her, there was another notch in the belt. There was a numbers count. It felt great. But I would be in the act, couldn't wait for the act to be over.
Oh, wow.
Couldn't wait for the sex to be over.
Wow.
Once it started, okay, I accomplished it. I got it. And then it would be like, I just couldn't wait for it to be over. Mm-hmm. And so it got to a point to where me now as a 56-year-old man, sex no longer motivates me. It doesn't do what it once did. Mm-hmm. And so I can honestly say early on, absolutely. Yeah, and as we mentioned, our symptoms begin to decrease for many of us as we get older, and I'm benefiting from that. I can honestly say I'm benefiting from that.
Right.
But the sex in the beginning, it was the best medication to me in my mind. But right. As I got older, that just kind of went away. I can honestly say that hypersexual behavior is long since been extinct. But yet I still am unable to connect. Most of my people oftentimes they say, man, you know, you travel all over the world, you 6-figure guy, you got all of this, I'm halfway decent looking, I'm at least a 5. And they always say, Pat, why don't you have a woman? And women ask me all the time, how are you single? And I tell them it's deeper than that. It's deeper than what you see on the surface. It affects me now. I'm 56 years old and I am painfully single. Painfully.
Wow. Wow. I would ask you a question, Sean. Some will argue that borderlines know what they're doing. You know, they're known as being manipulative. Did you know what you were doing, or was it a lot of it unconscious motivation, or was it a combination of both?
Definitely a combination of both. You know, I can honestly say some of my motivations were very unconscious, where I didn't realize where they were coming from. But then a lot of that behavior, I clearly knew it was wrong. I clearly knew what I was doing. You know, like the push and pull you mentioned earlier. I remember my last relationship. I was not my last ex-wife, who was literally my best friend. My last ex-wife was literally my best friend. But my last real relationship, that push and pull culture, I'm not joking. And she was a very intelligent woman. She was a doctoral student. She was brilliant. And when I tell you, if I had to count how many times we broke up in the 3 years we were together, I'm going to say, and you'll know it's true, if other people may not understand it, I'm going to say in those 3 years had to be 15 to 22 times that I was like, this is over. I'm done. Can't do it. But the minute she was gone, oh my God, that desire to bring her back was so overwhelming. And there were times when I was pushing her away that I knew in my mind, I really don't want to push you away. But I know I got to get you out of here before you kick me to the curb. Where I would end them before they. But that push and pull with many who suffer from borderline personality disorder, that's one of the hardest parts of being of loving someone with borderline personality disorder.
Right. You know, for the women that are borderline, they say the sex is intense. You know, not trying to get you to brag on your penis, but did the women say they got sexually addicted to you?
I can honestly say, and definitely not in a braggadocious fashion, I would oftentimes say I had no limits. There was nothing I would not do with a woman. There was nothing off the table with a woman. I mean, as I would always say, baby girl, if you like it, damn it, I love it. And so I can honestly say, as it related to me being intimate with women, there was simply nothing that was off the table. If they involve another female, if they wanted to do a threesome with another male, if they wanted it to be oral, if they wanted to be anal, if they wanted pain, if they wanted, you name it, if they wanted it, I wasn't going to say no.
Wow.
So whether or not, so I can't brag on it, but I can just simply say didn't exist in my vocabulary as it related to giving them what they wanted. However, go back to what I said. Many times I couldn't wait for it to be over. I couldn't wait for it to be over.
That's sad, man. That's really sad. Shout out to Asora C for that $5 super sticker. He said, "Really something for the therapeutic plate." What do you think? Before I go back with you, Sean, MC Recover, I don't want to. Did you say what you need to say, brother? I think you did talk earlier. Did you talk? You talked earlier. Okay, good. I didn't want to make sure I minimized you. But when you think about this, when you think about undiagnosed mental illnesses, Sean, what percentage of women or Western women, in your opinion, you think are walking around with unresolved mental issues, but we just see it as normal? If you had to guesstimate.
If I had to guess, and I'm going to be very conservative in this guess, I'm going to say 40 to 50%. I believe that it's more than likely higher because women endure so much trauma in so many ways. You know, whether it's the amount of trauma that women experience. But I if it were up to me, I'd probably say 50% of the women that are walking around are probably suffering. And as you know, it's not necessarily a bad thing. There are different types of mental health disorders, and some are more severe than others. And so, I mean, it's think about it like this. Just about every woman that we meet, what's one of the common fabrics of their story? Sexual molestation.
Molestation, right.
About I would ask every brother who's listening, ask your woman, was she ever violated sexually or
right.
the average woman
right.
will tell yes.
Yeah, they have. Yeah, I see it all the time, man. It was a young lady. She was going through some things that broke my heart. I felt sorry for her. And, that comes from some of these women getting with these dusty men. But then on top of that, too, Sean, it's a cycle. They go through the vicarious trauma of their parents. But believe it or not, I've had a lot of these men that have been sexually abused by men and women. We think, let's do a guesstimation about a number of men that you think has been through sexual abuse. What would you say the percentage is if you had to guesstimate?
I would venture to say, I would probably say about 30% of all adult males in there. But I would also say that obviously the vast majority of their sexual trauma would be in their formative years. But I would, and the number is likely higher. But I'm just going to go look over my I don't know, 11 years as a therapist, just kind of looking back at the sexual histories, the sexual traumas of. But I would say probably 30% of all the men that are walking around have had some. But again, here's the thing, Coach. A lot of us don't see it as sexual trauma. A lot of us don't see it as sexual trauma. When you're, 12 and the 16-year-old girl, says, let me show you what oral sex is like. We don't make that young man may not have saw that as a traumatic event.
Right.
Sexual behavior. So I would say that probably 30% of all men have experienced some form of sexual trauma, especially in formative years.
Yeah, I totally agree. And many times it goes undiagnosed and minimized because we tend to minimize the sadness of men. Sean, we were in Brazil last year around this time. We had a great time. Had an awesome time meeting you and a lot of other brothers. But, Kevin Samuel's death recently showed us unresolved thinking errors, but definitely maybe some unresolved mental illness. What was your take on that? And we're going to end the stream in a minute because I know the game is on. But what was your take on when Kevin passed and so many laughed at and more or less mocked him and his death? Did that cause you to be in a level of distress when you saw it?
It absolutely did. And me being someone who was an avid Kevin Samuels listener, absolutely. And to hear some of the venom of which people spoke about him, namely women, and a lot of your beta males and your simp males, to hear some of the venom and the way that they talked about him, and it brought up a lot of it elicited a lot of emotions in me. That the fact that one, we're raised, we don't speak ill of the dead and things of that nature. Right. But MC Recovery, he had a little part of you just talked about it a minute ago when we talk about how we're living good, we're, for lack of a better word, we're in recovery, but then something happens that triggered it. I think Brother Recovery mentioned something about being around women who could trigger some of those behaviors. Mm-hmm. So yeah, when Kevin Samuels passed, I think it was proof. I'll say this. It was proof just how right he was.
Right. And you're right. And not only how right he was, but also, Sean, to the cognitive dissonance. Also to the cognitive dissonance that many have. And Sean, that goes back to a term called metacognition. It means to think about what you're thinking about, but also I created a term called meta madness because it basically means what were you thinking about to have allowed yourself to get in that predicament. We're beginning to see it over and over again. The meta madness is morphing in society. And I've always said, Sean, we can't form a more perfect union if we have unresolved mental illness. I said that the simps, the beta males are the pacifists to some of these negative behaviors that women are having. Sean, you and I grew up in a time, man, in the 90s, where women were more respectful and women had shame. They had shame. And you're like a cusper. You're like a boomer and a X, so you're on the cusp. But, the woman said that men try to shame women for having a bunch of bodies. That was a shameful behavior. Men are not wired. Most men are not wired to have the dog. Right. The woman being with a bunch of men. We're just not wired. And people say, well, men are not wired to have thoughts of the woman being penetrated by multiple men. We understand women got a pass. We don't like it. If we care a lot about it, we try to tolerate as much as we can. But, now up is down, Sean, and down is up. And the things that made sense a couple of years ago doesn't make sense anymore.
Absolutely.
And I think that's the constant the constant germination of a very defunct culture where people can't see themselves, and they're not willing to see themselves, because when you rejoice over the death of a person, then that's problematic, in my opinion.
Yeah, culture. Shoot, I remember 17 years ago, because I had 22 years of recovery. At 5 years of recovery, I ran into some major depression, to where, I lost the job, the car was broke down, and then I kept missing my therapist, so I got another therapist across town just in case if I missed it. And stuff came out from being stuff came out from someone touching me at a young age. But what really came out, like a guy here, Sean said, that blew me away was my mother would have these babysitters, and it's 5 of us, and they would have me and my brothers and sisters playing house in a real way. Like you're the husband, you're the wife.
Right, playing house,
and it blew me away when that came out of my mouth. I went back and I said, woo! And I already did a 4-step inventory, but that didn't even come out on my inventory. That's how far it was buried.
Right, repression.
It was buried that far. I didn't did a 4-step inventory, and I'm like, whoa! So
well, recovery. Can I ask you a question, brother? In that whole recovery, think about how many people that you've encountered. You know how we say, when we're attending a meeting, never deal with her past. Think about the many people that you encountered in their addiction. How many of those do you think were part of their trauma history was sexual trauma, and later showed up in their addictions? What are your thoughts on that?
It is a lot. It's a lot, because in recovery, just put it this way, I wasn't. When I went to mental health at that time, I was a request from some people at my home group meeting that, go over there and see what's wrong with you, because I had the type of depression where I was sleeping like 2 or 3 hours a day. I was leaking, but physically my body knew to fellowship. So I didn't went to enough meetings that I was on automatic pilot for getting my recovery. But soon after all that passed, then I went to the sex addiction, and I told my sponsor, you know what? I don't need to sponsor nobody no more. Because I had magazines, videos, other women, and then I had to recover from that in the midst of my regular recovery.
Wow.
So it's like magazine by magazine, video by video. I had to have it, and he gave me a step 6 and 7 to write on my character defects and my shortcomings. So and I said, ooh, because I was really serious about not going to no more AA meetings, CA meetings, because of that hole that you spoke about. Because it was filling up something that I thought I was looking for. But when it's away, then it really had me feeling like I was on drugs. So drugs and alcohol and stuff.
I'm gonna ask you this question, Sean, then we're gonna end the stream, man. I'm gonna sign off. And guys, thank you for listening. I'm gonna check the game out. I'm gonna use the rest of this time to relax. But you said you begin to get better with your borderline personality disorder. Do you still get triggered now by dark-skinned women? Do you still get triggered?
Absolutely. It's no secret. We have this term in some of the travel groups. I'm known for saying I prefer banana yellow. I, to this day, still have no sexual attraction to dark-skinned women. None. None.
Right.
And I have to attribute it from the trauma because, don't get me wrong. I see dark-skinned women all the time who are absolutely gorgeous, but as far as me having that physical sexual attraction, it simply does not exist. I think in my lifetime, I may have dated, I dated one dark-skinned woman probably about 20-something years ago, but it was really sexual. It was all about sex. She had an unusual sexual appetite. But to this day, I still don't date dark-skinned women to this very day.
You know what, Sean? Your story is powerful, man. I'm gonna do a show coming up, man. I'm not going to talk about the title. I want to have you back again. I will be emailing you, and I want you. We're gonna go from the formative years at your early age. Man, your story is powerful, man. I never knew in a million years, brother, you went through that, man. But you got a very powerful story. I think I'm going to use your show. I think I'm going to use your show as like a. You don't mind your name being on the screen when I use it, do you?
None at all.
Okay.
Nothing at all. Nothing to hide. Remember, that's where guilt and shame is what binds us. Right? That guilt and shame, MC Recovery can tell you that guilt and shame is what keeps us addicts. That guilt and shame of our sexual traumatic history, I have nothing to be ashamed of. I didn't do it. They did. I don't know how old they'd be now. These two would definitely be in their mid-60s. But if they were watching this, I have a very unusual last name. So
Gotcha. Yeah, I'm gonna do a show on it. I'm gonna clip it, and then I'm gonna use this show, and we're gonna use this show as a reference point, and we're gonna add to that. So I'm gonna take this segment and break it down, and I'm gonna do a reaction to it. But then I'm gonna bring you back, and we're gonna make it comprehensive because I never knew you went through it, man. And your story is he's a your mom.
Yes, she is black, and I love black women. I didn't say I hate black women.
No. He's not shaming you. He's saying the foolishness that they say. He's not trying to shame you.
Oh, okay.
He's trying to say,
I do hear that a lot of times. And And I always say, look, I come from a black woman. I love black women. I love the black woman.
Right.
I'm just not interested in that aspect.
Yeah, he's not. Yeah, he's being funny. He's being funny. Right. Because I was thinking the same thing, but your mama black. I was thinking the same thing. Let me ask you a question. Being a borderline, are you sensitive to criticism? And do you go do transference or or do you deal with counter-transference with your clients? Because some say you need dialectical. Well, actually, you know what? I'm going to save those questions. I'm going to save it. We're going to save it for the next show.
And we'll talk about some of the therapeutic processes that I've went through.
Okay. We're going to save it, man. I might bring a couple of brothers that have been through pathologies as well. MC Recovery to talk about his too. So I'm going to take this show and clip it. I'm going to do a show on it. And then I'm going to bring you back. And there's going to be a part 2. So once again, man, I appreciate it, brother. I'm going to check this game out. MC Recovery, love and blessings, brother. Sean, thank you, man, for your kindness for the donation.
All right, brother. All right,
guys. All right, we're going to sign off, guys. All right.
Thank you.
All right. I'm going to see you, Sean. MC Recovery, I'm about to sign off, man. Thank you for tuning in and also supporting me, brother, right? All right.
Are you a victim of brokenness and despair? A broken man is a hopeless man, and a hopeless man is a very dangerous man. Many times, many of you young men that are listening come from homes that are very toxic and very dysfunctional. And because of that, many of you have deferred your power in many ways to the point it's led over into your social life, and many times led over into your relationships. If you guys are dealing with mental health pathologies, conscious and unconscious, come see me at kosherclinician@gmail.com. That's kosherclinician@gmail.com. It's important that you deal with your mental health in order to be a better person for yourself, your loved ones, and also your community. But because mental health is often stigmatized, many of you often suffer in silence. Don't be a victim in silence. And see me once again at kosherclinician@gmail.com. And I need you guys to remember this. If it ain't 7, it ain't kosher. If it ain't kosher, it ain't right. There are 7 steps that a man must go through in order to become an optimized male, and male mental health is one of those elements that's paramount to the functioning of a man. Be well.
Time to run it all. I wake up. Yeah. I wake up, flex, thumb down now. Check, no drip, just wet. Time to run it up. No sleep, no rest. Might crash, might wreck, but first I stretch. Time to run it up. I wake up, flex, thumb down now. Check, no drip, just wet. Time to run it up. No sleep, no rest. Might crash, might wreck, but first I stretch. Time to run it up. 9 out of 10, roll through my hands, I'm by my lonely. Turn to a savage, now my baby wants to hold me. I love my fans, don't need no friends, I got my homies.